picture this. You're standing in a cathedral made entirely of bones. Not a metaphor. Not a painting. Not some gothic fantasy you stumbled across in a nightmare. A real structure, thousands of human skulls, over 150,000 individual bones, cast and assembled by hand, stacked into columns that reach toward a crumbling ceiling, and right in the center of it all, a man in a white coat caked in iodine is dancing slowly with a monster. A monster that, just months ago, would have torn him apart without a second thought. And the song playing on a record player in the corner? Duran Duran's Rio. If that sentence alone didn't just tilt your entire understanding of what a zombie movie is supposed to be, then welcome, because you are in exactly the right place. Because 28 years later, the Bone Temple is not what you think it is. It is not what the trailers promised. It is not what the franchise history suggested. And it is absolutely, unapologetically, one of the most audacious, strange, and deeply human horror films to come out of England in the last 20 years. And we are going to break it all down. Every scene. Every character. Every symbol and every subtext. Every jaw-dropping moment and every bold creative decision that either completely works or swings so wildly that you can't help but respect it anyway. But before we get into any of that, before we talk about Ralph Fiennes slow dancing with an alpha-infected, before we talk about a satanic cult dressed in velour tracksuits named after a disgraced British celebrity, before we talk about the single most gut-punch cameo ending in modern horror history, we need to talk about what this film even is, where it comes from, and why the entire horror world was watching when it dropped on January 16, 2026. So stick with me. Because this one is going to take a while. And every minute of it is worth your time. Section 2, Movie Overview, Conversational, Context Setting. Let's set the stage. The 28 Days Later franchise is one of the most important zombie horror properties in cinematic history. When Danny Boyle and Alex Garland unleashed the original film back in 2002, they didn't just make a zombie movie, they reinvented the genre. Fast-moving, rage-fueled, infected. Empty London streets. A brutal meditation on what humanity actually does to itself when civilization collapses. The rage virus wasn't just a plot device. It was a mirror. And the world saw itself in it. Then came 28 Weeks Later in 2007, directed by Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, which expanded the world, raised the stakes, and delivered some of the most terrifying sequences in modern horror. Great film. But then the franchise went quiet. For almost 20 years, fans waited. Sequels were announced, then cancelled. Danny Boyle moved on. Alex Garland moved on. Cillian Murphy, who starred as Jim in the original, built an entire legendary career, culminating in an Oscar for Oppenheimer. And then, in 2025, it all came back. Danny Boyle returned with 28 Years Later, the third film in the series and the first of a planned new trilogy. Shot on iPhone 15 Pro cameras in the raw, wind-swept landscape of Northumberland, the film was a coming-of-age story wrapped inside a post-apocalyptic nightmare. It followed Spike, a teenage boy living in a quarantine island community, who ventures to the mainland on a desperate mission to get medical treatment for his dying mother. Along the way, he encounters Dr. Ian Kelson, a quietly brilliant and eccentric physician who has dedicated his life to memorializing the dead, and Samson, an alpha-infected unlike any we'd seen before. The film was polarizing. Some loved its lyrical tone and emotional ambition. Others wanted more horror and fewer philosophical detours. But nobody could deny it was ambitious, and it set up a sequel that promised to go even darker. That sequel is The Bone Temple. The film at a glance. Released in the United Kingdom on January 13, 2026 as part of a theatrical double bill, and in the United States on January 16, 2026, The Bone Temple is directed by Nia DaCosta, the filmmaker behind Candyman, 2021, and The Marvels, working from a screenplay by Alex Garland. It is the fourth overall installment in the 28 Days Later series, shot back-to-back with 28 Years Later in the British wilderness. The main cast features Ralph Fiennes as Dr. Ian Kelson, the obsessive, brilliant, deeply unusual physician we met in the first film. Jack O'Connell as Sir Jimmy Crystal, the psychopathic, velour-suited, Satanist cult leader whose gang is one of the most memorably unhinged villain groups in recent horror cinema. Alfie Williams as Spike, the young protagonist, now on the mainland and fighting for his life. Erin Kellyman as Jimmy Inc., a female member of Crystal's gang who becomes one of the film's most fascinating characters. Chia Lewis Parry as Samson, the Alpha-infected, who underwent a transformation so remarkable in this film that calling him just a zombie feels like a profound disservice. And in an uncredited, earth-shattering cameo at the film's conclusion, Cillian Murphy, returning as Jim from the original 2002 film. The film runs 1 hour and 49 minutes, received a positive critical reception, and grossed approximately $57 million worldwide against a $63 million budget, modest numbers, but good enough that Sony officially greenlit the third and final film in the trilogy before the Bone Temple even finished its opening weekend. Section 3, Full Story Breakdown, Immersive, Chronological, Scene by Scene, Full Spoilers ahead. The prologue, What Came Before. The film opens not with a cold open of horror, but with a quiet, almost elegiac prologue that essentially functions as a recap of the emotional core of 28 years later. We're reminded of the key beats. Britain is 28 years into a rage virus quarantine. Much of the country is abandoned, wild, and overrun. Small pockets of survivors live in isolated communities, mostly islands, mostly cut off from the mainland for safety. Spike had a mother, Isla, played in the previous film by Jodie Comer in a performance widely praised as one of the best of that year. Isla was dying of cancer. Spike, desperate and naive in the way only a teenager can be, dragged her across the infected mainland in search of Dr. Kelson. And he found him. But not in time. Kelson confirmed what they both feared: Isla's cancer was terminal. She died, dignified and loved, and Kelson incorporated her skull into the Bone Temple, his extraordinary, vast ossuary built from the cleaned bones of both the fallen survivors and the infected. It sounds morbid, and it is, but there's a tenderness to the way Garland writes it and DaCosta frames it that transforms it into something sacred. The title of the film appears in 2 separate parts, a stylistic choice worth noting. 28 years later appears early, in the familiar font. Then, several minutes later, after the prologue has settled its emotional dust, the Bone Temple appears. This signals something important: this is both a continuation and a departure. Same world, different soul. Act 1, The Mainland Nightmare. We pick up with Spike, now alone on the mainland. He is not the same boy we met. He's harder, colder, and he's running. The mainland is chaos in its most raw form. The rage virus has been active for nearly 3 decades and the infected have evolved into something more organized, more territorial, particularly the alphas, who seem to have developed rudimentary hierarchical instincts. Not full humanity. But a shadow of it. Spike is trying to navigate this landscape alone when he encounters a group called the Fingers, a ragtag gang of fighters who operate in the margins of the infected zones. They're violent, desperate, and morally ambiguous in the way that all survivors in this world tend to be. But they're not the main threat. The main threat arrives in the form of Sir Jimmy Crystal. Oh, where to even begin with Sir Jimmy Crystal? Jack O'Connell plays him as a charismatic, terrifying, utterly deranged cult leader, and the character is explicitly modelled after the real-life British figure Jimmy Savile, one of the most notorious predators in UK broadcasting history. The film doesn't shy away from this inspiration. Jimmy Crystal has the same bleached blonde hair. The same velour tracksuits. The same ritualistic performance of generosity that masks something deeply, profoundly sick. His gang, the Jimmies or Jimmies, are acrobatic, brutal, and blindly devoted. They don't just follow Crystal. They worship him. He's built a cult of personality rooted in satanic ritual, violence, and the kind of charismatic evil that preys on people who've lost everything and are desperate to belong to something that gives their lives structure and meaning. The Fingers are raiding a farm, a small community of survivors including a man named Tom and his pregnant partner Kathy. When Crystal's gang arrives and the situation escalates into something you cannot look away from. The violence here is visceral and shocking, not in the gratuitous slasher way but in the way that real violence is, sudden, senseless, and profoundly sad. Spike is captured and forced into Crystal's orbit through an initiation ritual that involves a death match. He has to kill a man named Jimmy Shite. This sequence is one of the most uncomfortable in the film, and Alfie Williams plays Spike's horror and desperation with remarkable skill. He's a boy. He is a child in a man-made hell. And he has to become something he never wanted to be just to survive the next hour. He survives. He's in the gang. And his life is now a nightmare he can't escape. Act 2, The Bone Temple and the Monster Who Learned to Speak. Meanwhile, cutting away from Spike's descent into Crystal's cult, we follow Dr. Ian Kelson, and this is where the film truly becomes something extraordinary. Kelson has been quietly continuing his work at the Bone Temple. The ossuary now contains thousands of skulls, over 150,000 individual bones, all cast and assembled into a towering columnar structure in the ruins of Redmere in North Yorkshire. It is a monument to the dead. A way of saying, these people existed. They mattered. They are not just casualties of a virus. Samson keeps coming back. Kelson starts noticing patterns. He begins to realize something that should be impossible. Samson is deliberately allowing himself to be drugged. The morphine xylazine darts that Kelson uses for sedation, Samson is seeking them. He's becoming addicted to the morphine. And when he's sedated, something underneath the rage starts to surface. Something quiet. Something almost wistful. The two develop a relationship. Not a friendship in the human sense, not at first, but something more complicated and more primal. Kelson begins to talk to Samson during his sedated periods. He plays music. He observes. And Samson, for his part, ceases to be aggressive toward Kelson even when the sedation wears off. Running low on sedatives, Kelson prepares himself for what he believes is the inevitable. He'll have to euthanize Samson before the supply runs dry. He even begins the preparations. It's a devastating scene. Kelson, standing over this creature that he has come to regard with something approaching genuine affection, holding the syringe, and knowing what he has to do. And then Samson opens his mouth. And he says a word. Moon. One word. Barely articulated. Grotesque in its phonetics because the virus has done terrible things to the musculature of the face and throat, but unmistakable. Kelson drops the syringe. He starts shaking. Because what this means, what this single, impossible syllable represents, is not just that Samson retains some fragment of cognition. It means that the rage virus may not be the irreversible death sentence the world has assumed it to be for 28 years. It means there might be a treatment. A path back. The scene where Samson says moon is one of the most quietly devastating moments in modern horror cinema. DaCosta directs it with extraordinary restraint, no swelling orchestral score, no dramatic close-up. Just the word, hanging in the cold English air, and Kelson's face doing everything. The Duran Duran scene. We have to talk about this. Kelson puts Duran Duran's Rio on a record player and just starts dancing. And Samson watches. And then Samson starts moving too. It is equal parts absurd and profoundly moving, and the film knows exactly what it is doing. This isn't played for laughs, or rather, it's played for that specific kind of emotional register where you laugh because the alternative is crying. The image of Ralph Fiennes, this quietly eccentric British physician covered in iodine in a cathedral of bones, slow dancing in front of an alpha infected to a 1980s synth-pop classic, is burned into the memory of everyone who has seen this film. It is an image that shouldn't work. That has no business being in this movie. And it is, somehow, one of the most human things in all of modern horror. The collision course. Jimmy Inc., Erin Kellyman's character, is sent by Crystal to scout the surrounding territory. She discovers the Bone Temple. She sees Samson and Kelson. And crucially, she notices Kelson's skin, covered in iodine solution, a protective barrier against the virus. She reports back to Crystal. Crystal is intrigued, and threatened. Because information like this, in his world, is power. And power is the only currency that matters. Meanwhile, Spike's situation within the Jimmies is deteriorating. He is not one of them. He can never be one of them. Aaron Taylor Johnson appears as Jamie, Spike's father, and the reunion between father and son is one of the film's more traditional emotional beats. A father who has crossed a ravaged world for his child. A son who is no longer the boy his father remembers. Act 3, The Reckoning. Crystal leads the Jimmies toward the Bone Temple. This is the film's final act, and it operates on two simultaneously escalating tracks. Track 1, Crystal's arrival at the Bone Temple is a clash of worldviews as much as it is a physical confrontation. Crystal has built his entire identity on the idea that the rage virus is divine punishment, that the infected are Satan's soldiers, that survival requires total submission to his leadership, and that any attempt to understand or humanize the infected is heresy. He is not just a villain. He is the embodiment of what happens when trauma and power combine to create ideology. Track 2, Kelson and Samson. As Crystal approaches, Kelson has a choice. He can run. He can try to protect himself. Or he can trust that what has happened between him and Samson means something, that the word moon, the dancing, the long months of quiet coexistence, has created something worth defending. He chooses trust. And Samson, this creature of rage and infection and biological horror, makes a choice too. The confrontation at the Bone Temple is staged with extraordinary visual flair. The set's geometry, columns and archways of bone creating labyrinthine space, makes the location feel both enormous and claustrophobic simultaneously. Crystal's confrontation with Samson produces one of the film's most chilling moments. When Crystal's ideology meets a reality it cannot contain, he doesn't adapt. He shatters. Jimmy Inc.'s arc reaches its conclusion in a way that is both tragic and cathartic. Her journey from devoted gang member to something more complicated is one of the film's quieter triumphs. The ending and the cameo and then. Cillian Murphy appears. Playing Jim, his character from the original 28 Days Later, a former bicycle courier who woke up in a hospital 28 days after the initial outbreak and stumbled into a world that had already ended and begun again. The character who started it all. Murphy's appearance is uncredited, unannounced, and absolutely devastating in context. He is the living link between the original outbreak and the world we've been inhabiting for 3 films. He was there at the beginning. And here he is, still alive, still moving through this broken landscape, 28 years later. His arrival in the film's closing moments sets up the third and final film in the trilogy with a weight and a promise that sent audiences in early screenings into spontaneous applause. This is not a mid-credits tease. Not a marketing trick. A genuine, emotionally loaded moment of continuity and consequence. The third film, which Danny Boyle has confirmed he will direct, will reportedly center Jim as a primary character. And based on everything the Bone Temple has established, that final chapter will have more than horror to reckon with. It will have hope. Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis, Deep Dive, Thoughtful, Critical, Personal. Ralph Fiennes as Dr. Ian Kelson. Let's be direct, Ralph Fiennes is doing some of the best work of his career in this film. And that is a sentence that carries tremendous weight when you consider his career includes Voldemort, Amon Goeth, M, and the Grand Budapest Hotel's Monsieur Gustave. What Fiennes does with Kelson is something genuinely unusual. He plays him as a man who has already grieved everything he needed to grieve and come out the other side, not healed, exactly, but settled. Settled in his purpose. There's a serenity to Kelson that shouldn't work in a zombie apocalypse setting, and yet it is the most interesting thing about him. He's not afraid. He's not desperate. He's focused. The relationship with Samson is Fiennes' greatest achievement in the film. He conveys genuine affection for a creature that cannot speak, cannot explain itself, and represents biological catastrophe, and he does it without a single trace of sentimentality. It is the warmth of a scientist and a humanist who refuses to let category define his experience of a living being. Jack O'Connell as Sir Jimmy Crystal. O'Connell is electric and disturbing in equal measure. He has publicly called this film the weird, deranged cousin of its predecessor, and Jimmy Crystal is the walking embodiment of that description. What keeps the character from tipping into cartoonish villainy is O'Connell's commitment to Crystal's ideology. Crystal genuinely believes. He believes the virus is divine. He believes he is chosen. And in a world where all conventional systems of meaning have collapsed, that belief, however depraved, has real power. O'Connell makes you understand why people follow this man. You don't agree. You're horrified. But you understand. Alfie Williams as Spike. Williams carries the film's coming-of-age arc with a performance that continues to grow from the first film. Spike in the Bone Temple is no longer the wide-eyed boy who dragged his mother across the infected mainland. He's been broken open and put back together wrong, and Williams communicates that fracture in the way he holds his body, the way his eyes have changed, the new flatness in his voice when he speaks to Crystal's followers. Erin Kellyman as Jimmy Inc. Kellyman is doing something subtle and remarkable in a role that could easily have been decorative. Jimmy Inc. is a true believer who begins to doubt, and Kellyman maps that internal erosion without ever telegraphing it. The audience knows she's shifting long before her actions confirm it. Her body language, her micro-expressions, the specific way she watches Crystal interact with his followers, Kellyman is always playing the character who is almost ready to leave. And the tension of that almost is what makes her compelling. Lewis Parry as Samson. This is, arguably, the single most remarkable physical performance in the film. Consider what Lewis Parry was working with: 7 to 8 hours of prosthetic application every single shooting day, a full bodysuit that couldn't be reused, the physical restriction of that much makeup, and the requirement to convey specific emotional states through limited mobility and expression. And yet Samson is not a monster in this film. He is a tragedy. Being caught between what the virus made him and what he once was, and Lewis Parry makes that liminal space visible. The scene where Samson says Moon is Lewis Parry's masterwork. The dancing sequence would not work without his absolute commitment to Samson's humanity in that moment. He doesn't play it as a monster doing a strange thing. He plays it as a being rediscovering something it had forgotten it knew. Section 5, Themes, Symbolism and Subtext. Intellectual, layered, engaging, these are the ideas that stick with you. Memento mori, remember, you must die. The Latin phrase memento mori, remember, you must die, was introduced in the previous film as Kelson's philosophical guiding principle for the Bone Temple. In the Bone Temple, it becomes more complicated. The film adds to it its counterpart, memento amoris, remember, you must love. These two phrases anchor the film's entire moral architecture. Death is unavoidable. The rage virus has made death not just inevitable but omnipresent. It is the water everyone swims in. The question the film poses is, given that, what do you do with the time and capacity you have left? Kelson's answer is to memorialize. Crystal's answer is the opposite: submit to death as divine will, and structure your entire existence around the power that fear of death confers. Samson's journey represents something else entirely, the possibility of transcending the category that death has placed you in. The path back, however partial, however slow, is through connection, through music, through the small specific kindnesses that distinguish human relationship. The ossuary as architecture of grief. The Bone Temple itself is one of the most potent symbols in recent horror cinema. Kelson's ossuary is both a continuation of a centuries-old tradition and a radical repurposing of it. He's not building a religious monument. He's building a civic one. In the film's reading, the rage virus was not a divine punishment, it was a catastrophe that happened to people who deserved to be remembered with specificity rather than collapsed into a general horror. Survivor in humanity, the real horror. Crystal's satanic framework, his Jimmy Savile cosplay, his death matches and devotion rituals, these are not arbitrary. They are the logical endpoint of a certain kind of traumatized charisma. If you can't offer safety, offer meaning. If you can't stop the dying, make the dying sacred. The cult is a religion of despair dressed in the language of power. And the film is astute enough to show us what that looks like from the inside, through Jimmy Inc., through the unnamed followers we see in the margins, to complicate any easy judgment. These people are not simply villains. They are victims of a specific kind of spiritual predation that exploits the particular vulnerabilities of people who have lost everything. The rage virus as metaphor for addiction. Samson's addiction to the morphine in Kelson's sedative dots is not just a plot mechanism. It's a comment on the nature of the virus itself. The rage virus, from the original film onward, has always been described in terms that echo addiction, loss of control, compulsion, the absolute overwhelm of a biological imperative that overrides all rational behavior. Samson's morphine addiction is the crack in the wall. The proof of concept. He craves something that quiets the rage enough that the person underneath can surface. And when that person surfaces, even briefly, even incompletely, he can say a word. He can dance. He can choose not to attack the man who has shown him something other than violence. The Jimmy Savile parallel. The film's use of Jimmy Savile imagery through Crystal is bold, specific, and distinctly British in a way that plays somewhat differently for American audiences than for British ones. In the UK, Savile is a uniquely loaded cultural figure, a man celebrated and knighted during his life who turned out to be one of the most prolific sexual predators in British history. The film uses this to ask a particular kind of question. How does evil hide behind the performance of goodness? How do communities construct and maintain the myth of a savior when the evidence of harm is all around them? Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review, Informed, Specific, Enthusiastic, The Craft Behind the Curtain. Direction, Nia DaCosta. The most interesting thing about DaCosta's direction is how deliberately it distinguishes itself from Danny Boyle's 28 Years Later. Boyle's film had a kinetic, handheld urgency. DaCosta's film is different. She deliberately slowed things down. She created space around the characters, not to reduce tension, but to displace it. The dread in the Bone Temple is not usually immediate. It is ambient. It lives in the architecture, in the silences, in the way Crystal's followers look at each other when he isn't watching. Her decision to film using the Arri Alexa 35, in contrast to Boyle's iPhone 15 Pro approach, gives the film a richer, more textured visual quality. The landscapes of North Yorkshire have a sublime, almost painterly quality in her hands. Musical score, Hilda Gudnadottir. The Icelandic composer Hilda Gudnadottir, who won an Academy Award for Joker and has done extraordinary work on Chernobyl and Tar, brings her characteristic approach to the Bone Temple, slow, texturally rich, built from extended techniques on string instruments that create sounds which hover between music and something more biological. The use of Rio by Duran Duran as diegetic music, coming from Kelson's record player, is a masterstroke of tonal contrast. The bright, warm, unashamedly joyful synth-pop of 1982 England landing in 2025 post-apocalyptic Britain creates a cognitive dissonance that is exactly the right emotional key for that scene. Production design. The Bone Temple set deserves its own award category. Constructed in Redmere, North Yorkshire, the set was built from approximately 5,500 individually cast skulls and 150,000 bones, assembled onto roughly 1,000 vertical structural uprights. The scale and detail of this achievement is genuinely staggering. It is a monumental piece of practical set design in an era when too many films would default to CGI for something this ambitious. Prosthetics and practical effects. The work done on Samson's prosthetics is exceptional. Each full-body suit took a team of 7 artists 6 to 8 hours to apply and could only be used once, meaning the production committed to over 25 full applications across the filming schedule. For close-up and waist-up shots, simpler partial prosthetics allowed for greater expressivity in Lewis Parry's face. The result is a physical character whose transitions from terrifying to pitiable to almost tender are rendered in pure physical language. Section 7, Critical Review and Comparisons, Honest, Opinionated, Fair. This is where we get real. What the film does brilliantly. The Bone Temple is the best argument against franchise filmmaking doing nothing but what audiences already know they want. This film is strange. It is committed to its strangeness. And in a landscape of sequels that sand every rough edge smooth for maximum broad appeal, that strangeness is enormously valuable. Ralph Fiennes gives what may be the performance of the year in any genre. Nia DaCosta establishes a visual language that is emphatically hers. The film's central thesis, that the monsters we make of each other are more dangerous than the monsters the virus made, is timely, resonant, and executed with genuine intelligence. The production design is magnificent. The score is excellent. The Samson/Kelson dynamic is one of the most unexpectedly rich relationships in recent genre cinema. And the cameo ending is one of those rare examples of fan service that is simultaneously genuine emotional storytelling rather than cheap manipulation. Where it struggles. The Jamie/Spike father-son storyline, Aaron Taylor Johnson's thread, feels underdeveloped compared to the richness of the other storylines. In a film where every other element feels meticulously calibrated, this one feels slightly unfinished. The pacing of the second act will genuinely lose some viewers. The Kelson/Samson material is extraordinary in isolation, but it moves at a speed that creates a significant tonal disjunction with the crystal cult sequences. The film's tonal shifting is a feature for some viewers and a frustration for others. There's no pretending it doesn't exist. Comparisons. The Kelson/Samson dynamic has been compared fairly to the central relationship in Arrival, 2016, Denis Villeneuve's science fiction film about communication with alien beings who process time and meaning differently from humans. Both films are fundamentally about the transformative power of genuine encounter with radical otherness. The cult sequences recall Midsummer, 2019, in their focus on the psychological mechanics of cult belonging. The franchise comparison is inevitable. The Bone Temple is a more philosophically ambitious film than 28 Days Later, and closer in spirit to Alex Garland's own directorial work, Ex Machina, Annihilation, which are also films about the encounter between human consciousness and something that reflects it back in profoundly unsettling ways. Section 8, Final Verdict, Summative, Emotional, Memorable. The bottom line: what this film is ultimately about. Here's the thing about 28 Years Later, the Bone Temple, that I keep coming back to, days after watching it, lying awake at 2 a.m. thinking about a man in an iodine-stained coat dancing with a monster to Duran Duran. The film is, at its heart, about what we do with the irreducible strangeness of other minds. Every meaningful relationship in the film is a relationship between beings who cannot fully comprehend each other. And what the film argues, quietly, without ever shouting it, is that the appropriate response to that strangeness is not fear, not violence, not the imposition of categories that reduce the other to something manageable. The appropriate response is curiosity and patience and the willingness to be surprised. Kelson is surprised by Samson. Crystal refuses to be surprised by anything because surprise would mean his ideology is wrong. And the difference between the open observer and the closed ideologue is the difference between what's worth preserving in humanity and what the virus, in its way, has always been eating. The film's title, in retrospect, means something more than it first appears. The Bone Temple is not just a physical structure. It's a way of being in the world. It's the choice to build rather than destroy. To remember rather than forget. To stand in the middle of a world's grief and insist that the grief be witnessed rather than weaponized. That's a pretty remarkable statement for a horror sequel to make. Who is this film for? This film is for people who loved the original 28 Days Later and want to see what that world looks like when it's been running for nearly 3 decades, when the horror has become normalized, when new power structures have grown up in the absence of civilization, when the questions aren't just how do we survive but what are we surviving for. It's for people who appreciate horror that earns its emotional beats. For people who don't mind a film that makes them think as much as it makes them scared. For people who want to see Ralph Fiennes do something genuinely unexpected and magnificent. It's probably not the film for people who want wall-to-wall running infected action, or for people whose relationship to the franchise is primarily about visceral genre thrills. Those elements are present, but they are not the point. And if you go in expecting them to be the point, you will likely be frustrated. It is definitely the film for people who can sit with the image of a dance between a man and a monster and understand, without needing it explained, that the dance is the most hopeful thing in the movie. Final rating. 8.2 out of 10. Highly recommended. A film that is strange, brave, occasionally frustrating, consistently rewarding, and anchored by one of the finest performances of Ralph Fiennes' already remarkable career. It is not the film many people expected. It is better than that. It is the film the franchise needed, proof that this world still has things to say, and that the people saying them have the intelligence and the courage to say them in ways that challenge and discomfort and ultimately move us. Remember, you must die. But first, remember, you must love. Outro, channel sign off. Alright, that is the full breakdown of 28 years later, The Bone Temple. If you made it this far, thank you, genuinely, thank you for giving this film and this analysis your time. This is exactly the kind of movie I want to spend hours talking about, because it deserves the deep reading. If you've already seen it, drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know, does the crystal character land for you? Did the Samson arc earn your emotional investment? And the big question, are you ready for the third film with Cillian Murphy front and center? If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. Watch 28 years later first if you haven't, then go straight into The Bone Temple. Watch them as the double bill they were designed to be. Let the contrast between Boyle's kinetic energy and DaCosta's architectural stillness do its work on you. Let Ralph Fiennes dance with a monster. And come back here when you're done, because we've got a lot more to talk about. Like and subscribe if this kind of deep dive content is your thing, and I'll see you in the next one.
You can't stop it. Watch me. They're here! Run!
Ambush! Take cover!
Return fire! Keep moving!